Welcome to The Fix,
the new way to get your copy reviewed by two former copy chiefs.
because whether you're an aspiring copywriter or you've been in the industry for decades,
The best way to improve your work isn't to read books, blog posts, or online guides.
is to see real writing, your writing, being reviewed and improved in front of your eyes.
And that's the goal of The Fix, to bring you inside a virtual writer's room
And watch along as we review, edit and rewrite real copy.
from real writers like you. So let's get straight into this week's episode. And remember, if you like what you see here,
Please share The Fix with anyone you think would find it valuable. It is completely free.
Hello and welcome to a very different episode of The Fix. Today, we're not going to look at a piece of your copy. We're going to do something slightly different. Now, little bit of backstory as regards to what we're doing today. I was supposed to be in the States today. Supposed to fly out to Seattle Wednesday, just gone, and I'd be coming back on Monday. But unfortunately, my little boy got sick. He was in hospital for 8 nights. He's fine now. He's downstairs making a racket, but I couldn't go to the conference that I was going to go to. However, we had planned to do this episode with me out in Seattle. I was going to a conference called the COSM Conference, which is run by an organization called the Discovery Institute over on the West Coast. Lots of interesting technology people talking at that event. And the primary reason I was going, apart from to meet with some people that I work with who were also helping to organize that event, was a kind of idea finding mission, I suppose. I was going to say a fact finding mission, but that's slightly the opposite of finding ideas, or maybe we'll come back to that later. But I was on the hunt for ideas, things that I can talk about in my copywriting into next year. I've kind of got to the end of the year, more or less got everything that I am going to do this year written and on the runway. So it's that time of the year where I start trying to fill my brain with new ideas. So we were going to do a whole session. It's going to be very glamorous. There's going to be that big building they've got in Seattle, you know, the one from the start of Grey's Anatomy, some of the cast of Grey's Anatomy, very Grey's Anatomy themed Seattle backdrop it was going to be. None of that.
Although you were going to be dressed as Indiana Jones on the hunt for ideas, weren't you?
Yeah.
That's why I agreed to do it with you, for the only reason.
Well, there was only 2 things that I actually was going to go and do, which I wanted to go and see, because my cultural understanding of Seattle is fairly limited. So I wanted to go to the Sky Needle, I think that's what it's called, Space Needle, big building. And I wanted to go to one of those Black Lives Matters protests, you know, not the protest, but you know, where they've taken over parts of the city and it's like this, I don't know what you would call that, something that's worth going to see. Anyway, not doing either. I'm here in my little room, writing away. But we're still going to approach the same topic, albeit with a much less glamorous backdrop. So slightly different vibe. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I think about generating ideas. Now, this is going to be fairly loose, and I think it's important to stress that. Glenn, maybe you could get the base out. You could give me a bit of...
I've got one in my office, like a real, office dip.
Well, I'll riff on ideas and you play Compile and we'll see what emerges. So, in all seriousness, I think when you start to talk about generating ideas, finding ideas, however it is whatever verb it is you want to use, there isn't a clean cut process. It's not you feed things in one end and ideas pop out the other. And that's one of the hardest things for people who don't come up with ideas and write them down for a living, which is people you work with, marketers, product owners, lots of people, and the wider public, you know, friends and family. People don't really understand what it's like, how you do it. And that can lead to all sorts of different problems. You know, some people see you as a creative person as like, well, you just sit around all day and then you do it at the last second. And sometimes that's true for some people. And other people see it as like, you just go to the idea cupboard and you take out another idea, don't you? Because they don't see the anguish and they don't see the process and they don't see how much thought goes into coming up with an idea. They just see the end product. I'm talking specifically about marketers there. I'm sure they believe we have a cupboard. Can't you just go and get another idea and we'll do that? It might appear like that, but it's a very different process. So I think it's right that we kind of riff on it a little bit. So there are 4 different things I wanted to talk about. They're actually 4 binary opposing ideas. You'll see what I mean by that, because I think it's useful to define what a good idea is in opposition to in opposition to something else. So the first thing I want to talk about is chaos and order. Now, that's a slightly strange place to start, but I'm going to try and talk about this in a really personal way, the way I have tried to think about coming up with ideas over the years. Now, a little story to get started. When I started my career, I did some work experience or an internship at an advertising agency, above the line, not direct response, brand advertising. In Manchester, and it was an interesting experience. Largely told me I didn't want to go and do that. There wasn't enough writing involved for me, so I then kind of got into the direct response world. However, that business was organized into 2 departments, and those departments, one was the head of order and one was the head of chaos. Chaos was the creatives, so the designers and the copywriters, and the head of order was the accounts team. Now, that, by the way, one of the designers' job title was Adobe One Kenobi. So let's not take the job titles too seriously. But that's always stuck in my mind, that binary opposition of chaos and order. And in the markets that I work in, I find myself over and over and over again using that same metaphor to describe what it is that we do. Financial markets specifically, but I think it's more applicable. The world feels like a chaotic place. The financial markets, the political world, social media, kind of anything you want to look at, news narratives, the world can seem chaotic. There's too much information, there's too much going on, and it's hard to make sense of any of it. As a copywriter in a lot of the markets that I work in, I often find myself gravitating towards telling the story of how there is a hidden order within that chaos. So that might be, ultimately, if you take a trader, for instance, that is what a trader does. They say, I can see order where there is chaos. But it's more applicable than that. It doesn't have to just be about trading. It can be about all sorts of different things. But I spent some time this week thinking about why have I returned to those concepts over and over again? I've done, thousands, it feels like, of different metaphors that describe that, the golden ratio, the hidden secret of this, things from the mathematical world, or things from the world of physics, like quantum physics, metaphors around that. They all approach that same idea, which is, though this seems chaotic and random and mad, if you look at the world like this, there is order. And the reason I think that is such a powerful way of talking to people is because order in that world stands for not just order, but it stands for an explanation. It stands for an answer. And ultimately, it stands for meaning. And I think as a copywriter or as a storyteller, if you want to think about yourself like that, ultimately, often, and almost always in the markets that I work in, that is what we're trying to do. We're trying to show them that there is meaning, and that if you understand this meaning that may be hidden or concealed to other people, you can be in control. You can empower yourself. You can almost feel heroic because you can see what other people can't. And so when I'm searching for an idea, I'm often using that mental framework in my head. I may write it explicitly in the piece of copy, or I may not. But I'm always thinking, how can I try to show the hidden order here in the world that may seem chaotic to other people? And I think that is a powerful way of thinking about ideas. I mean, Glenn, I don't know if that is something that strikes a chord with you.
So it struck a chord. I should have had my bass there to play a chord as we struck every time you strike a chord, I will make a sound. It'll just be the Seinfeld music, the Seinfeld bass line. But yeah, no, it did. And I think it's interesting. And I think I'm thinking like explicitly, how does that get you thinking about ideas? But I think, as you said, it's about getting yourself in that frame of mind where to look for ideas. And when you said about order and chaos there, the way it struck a chord with me was a lot of people watching this, I'm sure, as a lot of copywriters work freelance, and when you go freelance, you lose something massive changes in your life. And that is, you don't have the perceived, and I will put perceived in the kind of quotation marks or brackets, security, the safety of regular order. So you don't get your regular paycheck, you don't get that regular thing. So when you talk about the idea that you're looking for ideas that allow people to see an order in something, there's actually an even deeper emotional benefit to that, in that what does that really do? It gives people safety, it gives people security. We feel enormously panicked. I read a lot of philosophy and think about this kind of stuff a lot, probably to my detriment, certainly to the amount of sleep I get at night. But there's worry when you start thinking in chaotic terms, in like we are all just looking for systems and understanding and control and safety and security in things. So when it comes to being a copywriter, how do you exploit that? How does that allow you to come up with ideas? As you say, you're looking, where is the chaos? Where's what's going on in the world that's hurting people, that's causing people worries and insecurities, and how can you order that? How can you provide an order or find a new order for that? I think that's a very, very interesting, it's very valid, obviously. But yeah, I think it's a very, it's what I would term a irreducible truth kind of thing. It's where it's getting right down to the bottom of things. And you might say, oh, how do I come up with ideas? Oh, I go and look at this and I come up with this and I think 20,000 things. It's like, no, if you really want to get just down to the bottom of things, I think that's a great way of thinking about it. Chaos versus order. How do you put the order in there, and why? For the reasons you said, Nick, but also because that provides safety, security, and that's ultimately in almost everything. I mean, that's a big, silly statement, but it is pretty close. In almost every product that you are selling, whether it be a financial thing, whether it be shampoo, whether it be, I don't know, pizza, everybody's looking for security and safety and warmth and the feeling of belonging. They're all the same things. They're all synonyms for each other in a certain way. And that's certainly what we're trying to do as copywriters. So yeah, I think it's a great idea.
And I suppose meaning is a part of that. And just as a sort of coda to that, this will get us into dangerous territory, but perhaps interesting territory as well. That same mental framework is why people believe in conspiracy theories. Now, we don't want to peddle conspiracy theories, but why do conspiracy theories proliferate? It's like you saying specific. Why do they catch on, and why do people believe them? What is it about them? Glenn, you've frozen, and I don't know whether or not the Zoom call will pick this up. There you go, you're back. Perhaps that was a brilliant little moment of me mentioning conspiracy theories and you freezing in a very. Yeah. We'll look at that in the edit. But
weirdly, you froze on my screen, so that's weird. That's the thing going on here.
Well, I'm recording this, so I'll probably be fine. But why do people believe in conspiracy theories? Well, because they'd rather believe that there's a secret cabal of individuals who are pulling the strings behind the world, than believe that it's all just random and chaos and there's no meaning to any of it, and that we're all just cosmic dust. Do you know what I mean? Like, people don't want to believe that, whether it's true or not. They don't want to believe it. They want to believe that someone somewhere, no matter how evil they may consider that individual to be, they are in control, and therefore there is a hidden order. And I think that's a powerful idea.
Yeah, it reminds me as well, just in that bunch of talk, is that the idea that when it, using the word idea to define the word idea, but when you are looking for ideas, you're looking for ideas that people already want to believe. You generally can't persuade people to do things against their will, or certainly that's a very hard thing to do, and it doesn't happen very often. So when you are looking for ideas, you need to be, maybe this isn't where the genesis of the idea comes from, but certainly at some point you need to tick it along and go, do people want to believe this? Do people already believe this? Is it not just is it believable, but do they actually emotionally want to already think this kind of thing? It's always a very important check to make.
Well, that actually brings me to the second thing I wanted to talk about quite neatly. So I'll just kind of put it out there and we can discuss it, which is another binary. All of mine are defined in that way. The relationship between emotional feelings and rational thoughts. So emotion and rational approach. How your reader feels deep down about something, how your prospect genuinely on the gut level feels about it, and how they might express that feeling, or the thing they might present to the world. So the more rational version of themselves that they present. And I think that's a really important relationship to understand as well when you're thinking about an idea, because you cannot, it's worth accepting as a copywriter early doors, you cannot make your reader feel anything new about anything. You can only work with what is already there. Therefore, you have to understand what you think they already feel, because you need to work with that to a certain extent. Now, that's not the same as pandering, but you cannot change someone's mind on an emotional level about anything. You have to work with it. So I'll just give you a quick example and then I'll throw back to you, Glenn. I was just on a call earlier with business. We were doing an ideas meeting. So I had all the copywriters there, and I largely just spew ideas of variable quality out at them. But we were talking about this thing called the metaverse, this thing that's big in the financial world now. Facebook have just changed their name to Meta, or Metaverse, I forget. Anyway, this thing, the Metaverse, it's this digital world of virtual reality and whatever. We were talking about it, and a lot of the copywriters were thinking about how we can try and make people think it's a good idea, think it's the best thing ever. And that I would say that's trying to change their rational view on things, trying to make a case that's about logic, and this is great, look, it's got kind of rational moral implications to it. And I was saying, don't do that, because we don't know how they feel about it yet, and I suspect they feel quite negatively about it. Therefore, we don't want to get into the world of, is it good or isn't it bad? We need to talk about what we think the reader may feel about the world, and what I think the reader feels about that idea. Well, they feel like new technologies emerge and they make some people lots and lots and lots of money if they make the right investments at the right time. They probably feel, I mean, the world proves that for us when we look at cryptocurrencies, electric cars, all these things. Well, if they already feel that, then let's pitch our idea in that emotional space and not in the world of let's try and convince them that it's a good idea. And getting that right, that difference between the way they already feel and the rational thoughts they should or could have, is really, really important. And I think it's something that it's a mistake that people make. They try and make the wrong case. They try and change the reader's mind. Well, how could we possibly change someone's mind? We don't know them.
Yeah, it comes to timing as well, and an awareness. As you say, it's when you're looking at ideas, you've got to think where your reader is. As you say, where is that audience now? Obviously, you've got to do the work to figure out who are you speaking to, because if you're speaking to a load of now I'm making assumptions, I apologize to this demographic of people, but I imagine somewhere much younger than me, younger than you, is a gaming segment of society who now know they can actually make an income from doing online gaming, actually have think finding Pokemon in the street is like old school like abacus kind of level metaverse stuff, and are completely ready for this stuff, and they are like absolutely on it. Now, if you're going to them, then yeah, maybe you can talk about how exciting the metaverse is and all this kind of stuff. If you're going to a slightly older generation, I can now say me in that kind of bracket, I couldn't give a flying F about what's going on in the metaverse. I am not ever going to, I can't see how I'm going to have these Google glasses or whatever, or do that kind of stuff. Now, don't get me wrong, I might, but I am self-aware enough, and I'm aware of the market, and I'm self-aware enough of myself to now understand why, when you get older, you listen to the same bands you listened to when you were young. I understand now why my granddad can't quite deal with what's going on his tablet when you look at his thing and he's got 2,500 windows open because he's never closed them down. And you think, how can you not know that? You show me a metaverse piece of tech, I'll probably be the same. I'm falling apart in my knowledge of like future technology at an accelerating rate. Now, that's fine, that's just life, but that's going on. So as you say, when you're looking at ideas, you've got to look at where is the timing for where that idea is in your particular audience. And it's so key. You can talk about like so many things, but if you're just going to miss the audience, there's no point. So it's stuff like even right now, like I don't use Facebook and everything myself really anymore. But it's still where a load of like payable audience is. So people, you need to speak to that. Like your ideas need to go where the market is. And I think, as you say, it's kind of in defining what isn't a good source of good ideas. The fact that copywriters inherently will go, all right, well, this is get exciting. Let's try and tell people why it is. It's like, well, you've got to tell people how it affects them, maybe. But like, why is it exciting for them, not for in and of itself? So I think that's probably that kind of goes back into a different thing about coming up with ideas. But it is that idea that we talk about so often, is that you've got to go to the audience, to the reader, and say, why is that idea? Or let's say you've had a seed of an idea, and you think, oh, this sounds like something interesting, and it might be in itself interesting, but why is that interesting to the reader? If you don't do that extra mile, you'll end up pitching entire idea into the ether, into the void that no one's going to be listening to. So you do need to think about that.
Well, we want to work with our reader. You know, we want to be on the same side as them ultimately. So understanding what they want and think and feel is really important. Now, to connect those two things, chaos and order, and emotion and rationality, you know, people in the financial world, they want to believe that there's an order to the world. They want to believe that. They, on some level, are ready to believe. I'll give you another example, which is the same metaphor again, but not non-financial. I was talking to a friend who started a business that's got these very complicated algorithms which pull data from all over the internet, compile it in this machine learning environment. I don't really understand it, but I was saying and they can make predictions and forecasts based off of that. So that could help a small town understand which businesses are going to struggle and which ones aren't, which one could help HMRC find out which companies are fraudulent or whatever. There could be all sorts of hidden order in that chaos. And I was saying to him, that's a great business to be in, because on some level, everybody wants to believe and is ready to believe that that is the case. So what is your audience ready to believe? What answer do they want there to be? And give it to them. Now, the key is not to do that in a pandering way. You can't just lie, you know, so you have to, obviously you have to tell the truth as a copywriter, because otherwise you're not a copywriter, you're a liar. You know, you're not making an honest sale, you're making a dishonest one. But that's the space that we have to look at. What do they want to be true? What do they feel they want to be true? And can we connect that to some sort of answer that explains the chaos of the world? That's a thread that runs through everything that I do. Glenn, I've got more, but I'm conscious that I'm dominating the conversation here. Do you want to?
No, I think carry on.
Okay.
Carry on. I've got my ideas, they're kind of linked to this anyway, but keep going.
So I like to structure my points like this. So I've got two more. So one, the next thing that I might try and think about, and I'm aware that this isn't necessarily how to find an idea, but it's the step before that, perhaps. So perhaps we do a second show on this. It's how to think about what a good idea might be, which I think you have to understand before you can work out what that idea would be, if you know what I mean. It's like you have to get the dimensions right and the space it's going to occupy in the world. And then you find out what that thing is and tell that story. So it's slightly meta, to use a terrible pun, but I think it's important. I think you've got to get this in your head somewhere. So the next sort of binary I wanted to talk about, not so much a binary, more a high level and a low level, a macro and a micro, is the difference between narrative and story. And what I mean by that is a story is I would think of it as the individual story I can tell. The story of Helen who did X. The narrative is the kind of, is the bigger picture thing. You strip all the individuals out. What story am I telling about the world? What narrative am I putting forward? So it could be a before and after. You know, I was blind and now I see. I was fat and now I'm thin. However it is you want to think about it. Work out what that narrative is, and then try and find a story that illustrates that narrative. And the reason I think that's useful is sometimes you can pull out a story that's associated with your product, but it's sort of pointless, doesn't fit into the narrative you're trying to advance about the world. So, you know, a 17-year-old trader makes tons of money trading cryptocurrencies at 3 a.m. Cool story. I just made that up. I'm sure it exists. Cool story. But like, so what? Like if my audience is a 70-year-old man who's never invested in cryptocurrencies and doesn't want to be up at 3 a.m. What good does that story do? The narrative isn't right. I haven't figured out what that bigger narrative actually is. And I like to try and get that figured out too. So that really you can say like, this is about fathers and sons and, you know, however it is you might put it. This is about chaos and order. This is about, however it is you might want to think about things. You know, this is about the biggest boom in history. And then the story might illustrate that bigger, but I like to get that bigger idea fixed in my mind, because that's the narrative that the reader is taking part in, if you know what I mean. They're going to be somewhat heroic within that. The story may be just a way of illustrating that, maybe just a way in, just a nice little vignette or something. It doesn't have to.
Yeah, I think that's important as well, because there's what you're offering here, Nick, is really useful and great ways at these kind of ideas to think about what is an idea and how can you position your thinking to have that idea, kind of thing.
Yeah.
What you've also got is the kind of the nuts and bolts, and we'll get onto it in a little bit, because that's where my kind of mind works so much. But it's how do you actually have those ideas? Well, actually having ideas is really, that's kind of, it's almost inherent. That stuff's going to come from all over the world, in your mind, in your skin, in your thing, in your, just everything that you've seen in your subconscious. Ultimately it's going to come out of there, but the way, how do you get it out of there, apart from putting in loads of stuff or whatever, is giving yourself these frameworks. Because if you have a narrative, so if you have, as Nick says, like one little story, you've got one little story, it's quite interesting. But if you've got, and then how do you write anything else about it? I don't know. Like, you're just going to have one idea that you can go, here's my one idea, kind of thing. Whereas if you've got a narrative that you can work within, and you know what is actually happening, you know what the narrative that the reader will follow, following this idea. Our language is getting a little bit confused, but the narrative of that, you can then allow yourself, it gives you that crazy stuff, the inside, the subconscious, to work within a framework and go, all right, in that case, if the narrative is this, then I could do this idea, I could do this idea, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. And it gives you all of those different stories, rather than just kind of sitting there as I imagine, I would dare say, most people do when they're tasked to go away. If I said, go away and write this thing, you will straight away inherently just go and try and write the first story you can, rather than figuring out what is the narrative here, what is this really about. Once I understand that, there's millions of ways I can express that in little stories. It might not be a story, it might be something else, but it's about the difference between how do you not so much come up with ideas, but how do you then express them once you've figured out that. And that, I think that narrative way of thinking is really important. It's about understanding what your idea is really about.
I'll give you an example, Glenn. I'll try to give you an example. And all of this, actually, I think we're approaching the same thing, which is creativity. There's a mystery to it, but there's also not a mystery to it. There's a series of exercises, or there's a framework one can apply to make it easier. You don't just pull a story or some weird fact out of nowhere. If you know, for instance, that you want to tell a story about order and chaos, and that's, maybe you're writing about an algorithm, say, well, all of a sudden you start thinking about it in the right way. You start spotting things in the world that conform to that rubric, that are examples of hidden order within the chaos. You start to see them all over the place, actually. And then you realize that, oh God, I've got too much. And then it becomes a case of choosing what those individual elements are, putting them together. But until you've figured out that framework, that space that it's going to occupy, you think, how can any of that have any meaning to you, if you know what I mean? So you kind of have to, it's order and chaos again. There's a chaotic world out there, but we're trying to create order. So I'll give you an example of narrative versus story. Promotion I wrote about 6 years ago. And actually I can talk about it bluntly because I was the publisher of the product. I wrote it and I presented it and I signed the promotion off. So it was all my own work. It wasn't something where I was writing for somebody else. So what I wanted, the narrative that I wanted to put forward was about visionaries, about how there are people who can see further into the future than other people, and those people change the world and often make people a lot of money. So the visionary class, the visionary archetype, your Thomas Edisons, your Nikola Teslas, there are these individuals, because the product was an investment technology product, and it was about, well, okay, I want my reader to be thinking about the concept of being a visionary and being ahead and being outside of the ordinary, along, positioning themselves within this class of visionary people. That was the narrative. Some people see further. The story I then told was about Nikola Tesla. It was about, he had this idea, he pitched it to JP Morgan. JP Morgan said, no, we're not doing it. It will threaten my wealth, my empire. And he rejected it. And 100 years later, this idea was going to be kind of brought forth once more. That was the story, but the narrative was just as important, because the story was nested within that bigger narrative. And that narrative was really where I wanted to go. It was really how, my product and my reader's psyche were nested within that narrative. The story was just a way in. Ultimately, it wasn't important to the actual product at hand, but it was a way of telling that, it was a way of getting into that narrative. So it's a kind of macro, micro aspect. So it was all.
And to be clear, it was the story, the famous story of Nikola Tesla inventing powdered egg before his arch nemesis, and JP Morgan turned that down.
Well, big egg. You don't want to go up against big egg, because the big egg money, I mean, they will send their goons around, and they will egg you.
It set the powdered egg market back by at least a decade.
And humanity.
An hour. Yeah.
Broadly speaking.
Number 4.
Right. This is another sort of slightly more specific way of thinking about things. So there's the known and the unknown. How can we use things the reader knows about to explain things they don't know about? So in the industry that I work in, I mean, generally speaking, we want our product to have some element of the unknown about it, because we're offering something that hopefully the reader has never, the prospect has never considered before, or never tried before, or never even heard of. So there has to be an element of the unknown, okay? Let's take the metaverse as an example. That is an unknown abstract entity. We can't just talk about it like that. We have to find a way of using something the reader does know about to explain or get us into something they don't know about. And we actually do need both of those elements. We need the known and the unknown. And this is why schemas are really important in the world of copywriting. So the example I always use to describe a schema is, Glenn, quick literary quiz for you. How is Moriarty described in Sherlock Holmes? What schema is used?
He's an evil genius.
He's the Napoleon of crime.
Right.
This is the best example of schema that I can think of. I know what Napoleon stands for. I know what crime is. Therefore, the Napoleon of crime is a schema. You see this in the financial world all the time, where it's the Google of X. Now, that's a horrendous cliche. Horrendous. Please don't use it. But there's a reason. I know what that is. I may not know what this is. Therefore, I use the known thing as a schema to describe the unknown thing. And I think that's useful because it forces us to think in two ways. What's the unknown? What's the untold story here? What's the thing that everyone's missing? What's the thing we're ultimately selling? What's the piece of information that's been missing? The secret sauce. Okay. Well, how can we use something that the reader already knows about to describe that? You don't have to do this in every single piece of copy, but it's useful. There's a reason that schemas, I mean, how many businesses want to be the Uber of X? You know, it's lazy, but it's a cliche for a reason. It's because it's a schema. It's because I know what Uber is, and I may not quite know what the X market is, but okay, I can get a bit closer to it by using that comparison. So what do we not know about? What's unknown? And what is known to the reader, and how can we use that? I think that's a useful way in, especially if you're selling more abstract products. And everything that I really work in is financial or informational, and therefore is abstract, because it's not, you know, it's not like a chair. Just to go back to an episode that we did a few weeks ago, you know, chair that solves back pain. Okay, fine. Maybe I don't need a schema for that. Maybe I don't need the unknown for that. But in the world that I often are writing about, you know, you kind of need that unknown element. So the known and the unknown was the final sort of binary I wanted to throw out there.
George Clooney of Powdered Egg is all I can think of right now. And I need to just say it out loud or my mind won't work for the next 5 minutes. But
well,
anyway.
There's a reason that schema, and actually, I think in the last episode we talked about Made to Stick, the Chip and Dan Heath book. There's a really strong chapter on schema there, but it's how a schema is exactly as I've just described. How can we use something that the reader already knows about to describe something they don't know about? And the stronger the relationship with that known thing, the better. You know, if it's the Napoleon of crime, it's perfect, isn't it? Because Napoleon stands for so much, and crime is something that is easily understood and is an emotional concept. You know what I mean? There's an element of danger to it, yada, 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 yada. We bring those two things together, we have a really powerful idea that's way better than evil genius, by the way, because it means more. There's more packed into those concepts that we know about as a way of describing the unknown, the mystery of this evil genius, you know? So I think that's a useful way of thinking about things, and trying to apply a schema and a known thing to describe an unknown thing is a useful exercise to go through when you're trying to generate an idea. It's a little bit more specific than some of the other stuff I've said.
And I'd add as well, it's a really hard thing to do sometimes. It's made me realize as well, I've been thinking recently, like I've got a novel I've been working on, and I'm now trying to get an agent and what have you, and you've got to write these agent letters to people now. Obviously, it's not like it was once upon a time when you're James Joyce, you just kind of turn up and you're weird and what have you. You have to try and be selling that book from the moment. And unfortunately, the world that we live in, people want to see it's this meets that, and that actually is really fucking hard to do. Like when you're going there. So I've literally today been like looking at my books, and I've got big shelves downstairs. I go through going, right, because obviously what I've written is absolutely original and never been done before. Not like, but it has its own individual nature to it. So I need to find a way to explain that to someone who immediately goes, all right, I get that. And I get like the possibility of that and the potential of that. So I've literally been today trying to figure it out and going, all right, well, it's like this book. It's not like that book, but it kind of is. And it's but that element of that. And it, as doing that exercise myself, you realize that, as you say, Nick, how much more, how wealthy that is in ideas, because it makes you obviously, he's like, to go back to Moriarty, he's not Napoleon, but he embodies that stuff, and there's a wealth of stuff that he can take away from it, kind of thing. So yeah, my book might not be like this other book in certain ways, but it's got that feeling about it, and you can see where it's going, and it's just, but it does take effort and time to do this. And I think that's, we're talking about idea generation, and you started out, Nick, saying about the age-old debate between copywriters and marketers of like, oh, we'll just go and a couple more ideas. If you just fire that over, like as though you can just pull them out of a cupboard. You can't. It takes time, and I think as well. And it does take time. Or conversely, it can come in a second, and it all depends on where your mind is. It does depend on all the stuff you're putting in, and I would say you can't avoid when you're talking about how do you come up with ideas. You've got to put all this stuff in. You have got to fill your boots with as much information as possible. But that's only half of the, well, whatever percentage it is. But it's only half the game. Once you've actually got all of that stuff going around you without any structure, and I think it's really useful what you've done there, Nick, with the 4 different frameworks, if you like, of putting this stuff forward. And that's really what I don't like the copywriting industry a little bit, because so much of it is, if we go back to the story and narrative, it's all little stories rather than the bigger narrative. People don't tend to give frameworks away because they're a bit waffy and a bit thingy, and you can't really package them very well. But that's what's useful. Everything that's useful is ultimately a framework for you to be able to think in. And that's just, so in that respect, I think what you've got to do is get all that stuff in there, but then you've got to find these frameworks. You've got to think about it in those terms. And then once you've got that, once you've got your, maybe your kind of, you've taken, let's say, the seed through that. So the seeds come from something you've seen and you thought that's interesting. And as I know Nick's mentioned before, you keep a diary, you keep a note of things you've seen interesting, so that when a client comes and says, oh, we've got this thing, or a product maker's got this, or whatever, you can go, oh, actually that relates to that. That's interesting. But then you take that to the framework where you go, right, well, what does that all mean together? Then once you've got that, you have to go again, not back to the research, but you have to go to a new kind of research where you then go, right, well, let's look for that. Let's look for actively look for like some confirmation bias, actively go around and go, well, where am I seeing this? Where am I seeing that idea? Road test the idea. And this is all before you've written anything. Again, copywriting work like my job, it's so weighted towards the writing, it's preposterous. But you do so much of this work before you even sit down on the page and start thinking about it. Long copy, direct response sales letters, you can work a bit more around that, and you can start drafting out. But I'm thinking of like taglines for a brand I was working on the other day. You're looking at 7 or 8 words. Now, does that mean, all right, in that case, just 7 or 8 words, nice one, it's easy? Is it hell is like, it's as hard to do that as it is to get 10,000 words about something, because you've got, well, that is a tiny little story, but you need to get all of that arc and all of that idea beyond that. And the only way you can do that is by putting all the stuff in. You can't skip that part. That's like the first part. And we're assuming, can't remember which mentor, whatever it was, but everyone in the world has always said, to be a copywriter, you need to be curious about the world. You need to be just reading and interested in stuff anyway. And that's not necessarily reading as in sat there reading your Shakespeare. It's just reading the world, looking around and being curious about things. So that's the first part. You got that tick. But then once that's all in you, to get it out is very difficult if you're just going to take brief number one and go, right, and like you're some massive library and you're like racking through going, all right, where's that idea? Oh, it's there. 2 weeks ago, I saw this thing on television, I'll use that. You've got to put it within those frameworks. So I think it's really useful to follow those things that Nick's outlined there. I do think I've got one of the things I wrote down, which I'm going to say, and I think it's quite clear from my behavior generally, is that when it comes to ideas, I can't let a discussion about it go out without stressing the importance of being weird and being crazy and allowing yourself to be strange and wrong and say weird things and be weird. I know there's a big debate about society these days or whatever, but if you are going to find these strange ideas, if you are going to connect these things, if you're going to form these new schemes, if you're going, rather than the cliched ones, if you're going to find all this stuff, you need to be like out there. You need to be experimenting, and it's one of the reasons we do the fix generally. But it's the idea that you've got to trust your people around you to be able to just go, what about this? Blah, 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 and say the strangest thing. If you're, Nick said the other day, I remember, I'm sure people thought it when he said it, oh, go away and write me 100 headlines for that thing. People go, what, 100? How do you get to 100 that isn't just saying what the how, what the hell, what the heek, what the who? It's about 100 different ideas, and how you do that is just saying crazy stuff and going crazy and letting that original stuff come out as much as possible. So you've got to be crazy, you've got to be strange and allow yourself to be wrong, and to get those, for those ideas not to be right, and to work on them within those frameworks, I think is incredibly important. I think people overlook it far too much. They come to peer reviews, they come to a written piece and just go, oh, here it is, this is everything, and this is perfect, and I assume this is right, kind of thing. You're like, well, no, I didn't expect it to be right. I expected it to be weird, and then we'll make it good. Like, that thing for me is one of the only ways you can like find good ideas, is by allowing yourself to be a bit crazy.
I completely agree. I mean, we're going back to chaos and order again.
Yes.
Perhaps it's something that I'm obsessed with, but what you're talking about there is chaos. And I think what I'm trying to introduce is a form of order, but you need both. That's the whole point of this, that there is an organization and an underlying order to compelling ideas.
It's a loop as well, isn't it?
Yeah, but you have to have that other phase as well. You have to have the madness. You have to have it all. Yeah. And that's the fun part about being a copywriter. I think perhaps we should wrap things up today, because this is such a big topic, and because we run the risk of it becoming slightly sort of navel gazing and not useful. And the whole point of what we do at the Fix is to be as useful as we can, but we're trying to pepper some of these other more philosophical things in. I think the point I would end on, the final binary, which I think we should sort of pick up in maybe part 2 of this in a few weeks' time, is the 2 places that your idea will probably come from, which is your reader and your product. But I think we'll leave that idea and we'll come back to it in a future episode. And just to sign off, I wonder, if you've enjoyed this show and you have something you want to contribute to the discussion, because it is a intensely personal and unique experience generating ideas. If you've got a process, or you've got a particular headache about coming up with ideas, something you find particularly hard, write to us. We've got a new email address. The old one still works, the old domain name, but we've got a new one, which is feedback@thefixcopywriting.com. Forgive us, we're just humble writers sat in our little rooms tapping away. We're not web experts and things like that. So feedback@thefixcopywriting.com. The old email address works as well, so you can reach us via either one. But write to us, because I'd like to do more around this. I'd like to do some specific workshops around how might we try and come up with an idea. In fact, we have an idea to try and do some of these live, get everybody in a room and say, right, give us a product, give us a pitch, let's workshop it live, so that people can start to see how it might actually happen in front of them. Because we've talked about things in the abstract, but the point is always to bring them down to the specific and the concrete. Anyway, none of which we can do without your help and input. So please do write to us. I hope this has been useful, informative, entertaining. It was better than just sitting at home and thinking, I missed out on a trip to Seattle, which I was really looking forward to. So I hope that this has been useful. Please do write to us. Glenn, any final words? I mean, do you want to get the base out for a final?
I won't get the base out. I will say, as you say about people writing in, what I think what the trouble we will have, or the trouble that we face, is that much of copywriting is process, and it's how you find your own process. Nick has his process, I have my process. They're quite similar, but they're different in other ways. But your process will ultimately be different. Each process throws up different challenges. I learn from things that Nick does. Nick based everything he ever is on me, and it's obvious. It shows. But what's your process like, and where do you see the drawbacks? Like, where are you hitting the wall? What's taking the time? Let us know, because we might be able to shed some light on that and offer a different idea for that. It's just about understanding each other's processes. So do let us know about that. Other than that, I will get my amp up here for next time so I can do some bass for you, Nick.
Or if we do a live show, and by live show, I mean hiring a room in a pub. I don't mean anything more. You can play us in. I'll riff. I'll read Howl by Allen Ginsberg in a beret, and you can riff, and it can be really. It can be an exercise how not to be creative.
I've got a strange image in front of me now. But yeah, I think I'm all up for seeing you shouting "Oh Holy" at the top of your voice.
I saw the best minds of my generation. I don't know the next part of the poem, but it's a good one. And on that note, talking of chaos, on that note, let's sign off. We'll see you back again early next week for a regular episode of The Fix. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
And there we have it. We hope you got something valuable out of today's episode of The Fix.
Maybe it sparked an idea or two for your next writing project. Maybe it triggered a new headline, opening line, or story to tell your reader.
Maybe it inspired you to scrap what you have and start over. Or maybe it made you want to submit your current work in progress for a little constructive feedback.
If that's the case, then please send it to us at feedback@longcopymasterclass.com.
Or if you don't want us to review a specific piece of writing, send us a problem you're trying to solve,
or a challenge you want input on, and we'll do our best to help.
And remember, if you like The Fix, please do share it with other writers, business owners, and marketers.